So, just a couple questions regarding last night's session.
Okay.
Some person said Adam was created. Eve was then taken from Adam's rib.
Mm-hmm.
What is the significance of her creation from the male when all animal and plant life was already created male and female?
That's a really good question, and one that I maybe be a little tentative to answer with any force, because I haven't done the commentary work on what sounds. I mean, that sounds like a really good master's thesis type question, and I don't mean. I mean, like that's a really good question. But I will tell you. So, Alistair Roberts, who I had dinner with last Tuesday, and he has his PhD from Durham, Old Testament guy. He has a book on Exodus and the Exodus journey as it develops through the entire corpus of the Bible. And he also does Bible studies daily. You can find YouTube videos with him. He's great, especially if you like a nice British accent. Perfect. But he's got a 250,000 word manuscript that's not quite in press. It's still in the editing phases, but should be coming out hopefully within the next 18 months on gender in Scripture. And the first thing he does is he kind of takes a step back, not looking to answer the questions that we often think about when we think about gender. What should a man do? What should a woman do? Authority, all that good stuff. Instead, he just watches it grow up from Genesis to Revelation, including things like how the fool in Proverbs is always male and wisdom is often female. And what does that mean and the implications there? And Song of Solomon and the wedding. Why is the wedding feast this feast that we're going to all get to go to in Revelation? And so I would defer to someone like that, who I think has probably done a lot of work on gender in the Bible, and why is it that Eve is taken from a rib and has a special creational process. That said, just an off-the-cuff, could be wrong, would have to do some work on it to double-check. I think, again, the idea that there is something one flesh union, that is not true in any other sense. When two species of animal mate and produce, there can be lifelong connections. Penguins, I think, do that. I'm not sure. But there are certain species of animals that only mate once and mate for life. And yet they're not given a one flesh union designation. And so I think being taken from the flesh as creation and then joining together in marriage reflects something of the unity of God in a way that no other relationship in all creation can, and bestows further dignity on humanity unlike anything else in creation. Alistair Roberts.
Thank you. Another one regarding last night. You talked about Christ's intimacy with us and how that tied into the incarnation. And you made a point that probably many of us overlook, and you saying Christ has a body right now. Mm-hmm. Someone asked how, I want to get their wording exactly right. Yep. What do we mean by this, and how important is that view? So maybe is that like an essential Christian thing, or is that some Christians believe this, some don't? Kind of what do we mean by Christ has a body right now in heaven, and how important is it to believe that?
So it would be an orthodox position established when we looked at Christology as to, was he the particular heresy that you're trying to combat is something called Docetism. Docetism. Look it up. I can't pronounce it for some reason right now. Is that he seemed, dokeo is the word in Greek for seemed, so seemed human, wasn't really human. And so Jesus, even in his resurrected form, says, put your hand here. Notice that a ghost doesn't have substance. I have substance. I am still human. And so the church wanted to make sure that his humanity has to be perfect humanity, not limited time-bound humanity, but humanity as it always is, because he must be what we are to be our substitute. And so he takes humanity to himself from the moment of his incarnation forward. Now, if you said that Jesus has a human form now and that he unsubstantizes somehow, he's no longer of substance form in his human nature, I don't think you're going to hell. I don't think you're a heretic. You're just heterodox, which means you're not in line with the Christian standard that goes all the way back to, in this case, probably the 4th century as to how we think about Jesus. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because his sacrifice of taking limitedness to himself isn't a 33-year sacrifice. It's a sacrifice from the moment he took on embryonic form to forever, from that place forward. That's an incredible sacrifice. If I were infinite in knowledge and perfection, I would not want to take on limitedness for 1 nanosecond, let alone for all of the rest of eternity. Right? The other thing it does is that it reminds us that wherever heaven is, it's a physical location. It's not just some wispy location, right? It has physicality because Christ is there right now with physicality. Now, is he the only one there with physicality? Are our souls immaterial when they're with him? Is there what they would call a resurrected body before that's an intermediate body? Not this body, not the resurrected body, but an intermediate body. And reformers are split on this, whether or not they think there's a resurrected body or a non-resurrected body. And I could give you the texts for why people would think differently, but that's for a theology class and not a marriage conference.
Yeah. Thank you. For those of you who worship here at Christ Community, once a month on Communion Sundays, we recite the Apostles' Creed. So tomorrow's a Communion Sunday in which we'll say as part of the Creed, and he ascended to the right hand of the Father. So definitely a mainstream Christian view that we would want to hold to, even though there may be some differences in how exactly you interpret all of that. We would want to affirm he definitely has a physical body and will forever. For this morning's material, there's a few people that wanted you to repeat the 5-to-1 ratio. They might have missed what you meant by that, or what the 5 was and what the 1 was.
Yeah, someone came up to me and I realized I did not explain that well, so apologies. So what Gottman is saying is that when there are bids for connection, that out of 6 bids, 5 of those have to be handled well, and 1 can be handled erroneously. And if you get to the place where you're only handling 4 of 5 well or 3 of 4 well, then you're going in the wrong direction and you're moving towards isolation, not intimacy. You'd rather go in the opposite direction where you're handling 7 of 8 well or 9 out of 10 well. You're increasing percentage hit. Does that make sense? So you just want to make sure that the dividing line, the Mendoza line, as it were, here is 5 out of every 6 you're handling well.
Thank you. Another one. Much of this related to conflict in some way.
Yeah.
And I think someone asked a really good question and said, do you have any guidelines for when to overlook an offense and when to have a conversation about it? Of course, in a gracious and loving way, they put. But when do I just overlook? Mm-hmm. When do I need to have a conversation about it?
Great question. And again, if we were doing the conflict material, this is part of what we would talk about. But the answer here is that oftentimes when something happens that causes relational pain, you're not sure if this is an issue that needs to be talked about or if it can just be overlooked and forgiven. We always want to move in the direction we've been forgiven much, so we want to forgive much. So the illustration I like to give, so I told you I was an IT worker for 10 years, right? Part of that history is for the first 5 years. When I was 15, I started an IT business in Memphis. That sounds really smart. It's not. I just hang out with people who are. That's the Lord's kindest blessing to me my whole life, is I get to hang out with people smarter than me. And it was true when I was 15. And so a bunch of guys got together. We got certified, started this business where we worked on people's home computers and eventually networks, which then led to an entire career. But when you're 15 and you start a business, no one tells you how to run it. At least none of our parents, because most of our parents were divorced and whatever. They weren't actually in the picture. The first time I got a bill saying that I should have set money aside for Social Security taxes, I was floored, right? And then what happens with all small businesses is that you ramp up in people who want your services, and then you go through lulls, right? And somebody who's ever known a small business, you put money aside to get you through some of the lulls and reinvest it. We didn't have any of that. So we would go through like 2 or 3 months. This has a point where we didn't have people, or we didn't have any clients. And so we didn't have this terminology at the time, but we would gig, right? You would find some job that you could do just for 2 or 3 months until the IT stuff came back online, and you'd go do that because that had a vocational element to it. One of the things that I gigged, please keep this between us. If this got back to the staff at First Pres Columbia, they would give me no end of a hard time. So this is just between us, right? Okay. One of the gigs I had was ballroom dance instructor. Okay. First off, you've never seen anything funnier than 2 men having to learn how to tango together, because they separated men instructors and women instructors. But as you're learning these maneuvers, oftentimes you're going to step on a toe. And you don't know, did I step wrongly or did you step wrongly? And I don't know how bad that injury is. I just know it hurts. And the only way I know that it's an actual injury is if it continues to hurt over time. If in 5 minutes from now it's still throbbing and I can't put weight on it, the likelihood is it's more serious, right? Okay, so all of a sudden we've had some sort of interaction, and that interaction has left pain. I'm not sure if you stepped wrongly or I stepped wrongly. Someone stepped somewhere. And I could have stepped wrongly because it's just my own stuff. It's just like my own history of whatever it is. The other day, like I said, with Melanie, where she could tell me exactly what was wrong, there was hurt left over on my end because I was tired and irritable. That's my stuff. That's not her stuff. She didn't step wrongly. I stepped wrongly, okay? But if she steps wrongly, and I can clearly see that, and oftentimes, in order to have that communication, it takes a little bit of time, say 15, 20, 30 minutes before I can clearly see what just happened. In that initial moment, I just know I'm hurt. So couples often have this exchange. None of you, I'm sure, but couples often have this exchange. You're talking, you can tell someone just their feelings got hurt. Hey, what's wrong? Nothing. No, really, what's wrong? Nothing. No, I can tell there's something wrong. What's wrong? Nothing. Right? And we all know there's something wrong, but you need some space to kind of gather my thoughts, my feelings, and to assess whether or not this needs to be discussed, whether or not it's your fault, or whether or not it's my fault. And so instead, we need to be able to say, what's wrong? I'm not real sure. But if I need to talk about it, I promise I'm going to come back to you and we will. Other than that, we're going to be fine, right? Okay. So now I've gotten through the initial 15, 20, 30 minutes. I know that you stepped wrongly. It hurt me. Now I need to assess on a scale of 1 to 10, is this a 1 to 5? If it's a 1 to 5, I'm going to take it to the cross. I'm going to forgive it, and I'm just going to move on. It is learning the skill of looking over transgression, and love covers a multitude of sins. If it's a 6 or above, I'm going to try and talk about it. Now, love keeps no list of wrongs. Actually, tomorrow's text is 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to talk about that very idea of resentment. So it's not like I'm taking it to the cross and I'm forgiving it, but I'm really going to use it in like 2 weeks from now. No, if I take it to the cross, I'm going to leave it there. Now, if it keeps perseverating, that is, it keeps coming up and coming up and coming up, it's probably not a 5. It's probably more like a 6, a 7, and an 8. Okay, if that's what it is, if it's above a 5, I want to talk about it. But if I'm at a 9 or a 10, I'm probably not going to talk about it well. I'm going to talk out of my hurt, not for my hurt. And so if I know this is a 9 or a 10, I need to talk about it. I need to wait until I've kind of crested that hill of anger, and I can talk about it in a way that's honest, speak for it without lashing out, right? And then it would be time to have that sort of conflict.
Great guidelines there. Thank you. Someone asked, which seasons of marriage tend to be the hardest? Why? And how can we prepare? So I'm sure you've seen trends in your studies and in your own counseling. So what seasons tend to be the hardest? Why do you think that is, and how can we prepare for that?
I wish that I could send you a slide I have right now that lays all of that out for you. I can walk you through. It would take me an hour. I do this with all my premarital. Because if you know a hard season's coming, you're free to be different. You're free to anticipate the difficulty and therefore be prepared and not be swamped by it like other couples are. But again, that's an entirely different conference. So I will tell you that there's a phenomenon called the U-shaped curve. Anybody heard of the U-shaped curve before when it comes to life satisfaction? Two researchers, one from University of Warwick, the other from Dartmouth, in the, I want to say without having I think it's the 80s, they did this research. They were behavioral economists, not psychologists. And I kind of like BEcon better than psychologists a lot of time because they have harder data. A lot of psych data comes from surveys. Surveys are data, but they're the weakest kind of data because your hearts are labyrinthian. Depends on what I had for breakfast. I might think something different. So BEcon economic data is actually much more stable, and they proposed based on not stage of family life, but age, how satisfied were you? And what they found is that 20 to 25, you have this peak, and then it begins to go down, as we all know. 26 to 30, and 31 to 35, and it just keeps, and then out here, 55 or so, it begins to make a turn back up. And so they called this the U-shaped curve. It had moderately high validity for its initial research. When it made it across the pond, keep in mind this is pre-internet days, when it made it across the pond here, because it was originally the UK, even though it was a Dartmouth researcher, mainly UK that was looking at it. When it made it across the pond, it took about 5 to 10 years, and marriage and family therapists took up this research. And they normalized it instead of by age, they normalized it by family stage. So premarital, newlywed children, adolescent children, empty nest, retirement, and after, basically, were your stages. And the U-shaped curve really firmed up, had high validity. And so you can actually find a lot of this now. National Institutes of Mental Health uses it. The National Labor Relations Board uses it some. Just look up U-shaped curve, and you can find a lot of this data. But the lowest, where you hit the bottom, is adolescence, when you have adolescence in the home. And anyone who's ever had adolescence in the home know why this is true. That you get this 6-month range where they love you and they want to be around you, and then your very presence is so irritating to them. You did nothing but walk in the room. How dare you walk in the room that you pay for? Right? Yeah. You are breathing my air. Why would you do that? I knew that my first child was entering this phase because I'm a very physically affectionate person, right? I love giving hugs, which some of you even here know. Oh, I can see you again and I give you a big hug, right? I'm like, okay, dude, back off. But that's just who I am. And so my oldest, when she got to about 11 and a half and 12 and a half, which is when girls tend to hit adolescence, she went from giving me hugs to what's the very least amount of me that can touch you when I give you a hug? And I'm like, and I knew she had exited that phase because one day she came home. So that was probably 6th grade, 7th grade. She came home as a freshman. You're talking 2 or 3 years now. And she wasn't sad. She wasn't crying. She just came up and gave me a bear hug. I was like, oh, I've missed this. So that season where oftentimes what you've done is you've allied your life for the betterment of these beings, and these beings now hate you for no apparent reason. And then their emotional volatility every single day, they lose their minds. I call it the knucklehead phase because they are just absolute knuckleheads. Why would you do that? That makes no sense whatsoever. But we were all there. All you have to do is think about what you did as a teenager. Like, oh, I hope they don't do that. Praise the Lord they didn't have social media when I was an adolescent. Nonetheless, that's also often the phase where you're able to see the apogee of your vocation. So you can often see, where am I likely to hit vocationally? Am I going to be the CEO? Am I going to be the rock star? Am I going to be the movie star? Am I going to be the next influencer? Whatever it is that you're headed to, you get to see what that apogee is for you. So all dreams begin to die. And then you watch age appear on your face. And if you're beholden to physical beauty, it's a tough next rest of your life. You're not winning that battle. You can delay it for a long time with certain injections and whatever, but you're not winning that battle. And so all the lies that society has fed you about what will make you happy, it becomes readily apparent. And if you've not allowed your marriage to continue to have the deep and abiding connection it was designed for, all of a sudden your kids hate you, you feel alone, and all the answers of all of society have betrayed you. That's a great season of life. And so that tends to be the lowest. And then when you launch your last child is when that begins to tick up. There's a hidden depression in there if you have a stay-at-home parent and they haven't begun to readjust, kind of like find places to deploy their talents and stuff. Usually about the time that the last child gets their driver's license, although kids aren't getting their driver's license nowadays, which floors me. I wanted to drive when I was like 12, let alone I had to wait till I was 16. But if you're not finding ways to deploy your giftings by the time that youngest is getting out of the house more, then when all the kids are out, there's a depression that happens there. But other than that, there's usually a nice re-up that happens. I could talk through every one of those phases it would take an hour for me to talk through all those phases, but I can at some point.
Quick follow-up about driver's licenses. If you started your own company at 15, who drove you to work?
My mom. Seriously. So there were 3 of us, and the oldest one was 16, and he got a pager from a kiosk in a mall. Every element of that sentence dates me. Do you remember when you could go to kiosks in the mall and you could get a pager? Okay, he had a pager, and we put our names and numbers on cork boards in the more affluent areas of Memphis, Tennessee. And we got more calls than we could handle the very first weekend. And I had to get my mom to drive me to people's houses and go, I'm here to work on your computer, right? How many times someone called me Doogie for Doogie Howser, for those of you that, again, it dates me. I cannot tell you the number of times I got called Doogie.
All right, back to business.
Yeah.
Thank you for that fun story. This question overlaps with parenting children, but I think it does relate to how spouses communicate with each other. So someone asks, what are some principles in dealing with disrespect with kids? For example, one spouse might not address the issue while the other spouse wants it addressed and disciplined.
Yeah. So I would say that how your kid handles the word no is a good barometer of your parenting. Your kid needs to be able to hear the word no and respond respectfully, even if they don't necessarily respond joyfully. So there's a strain in Christian parenting that's like immediate joyful obedience. Yeah, right. I think Ted Tripp is really common for that. I don't agree. I think that's a good goal to have, but I don't punish if my kids aren't immediately joyfully obedient, because I don't do that. How can I expect my 7-year-old to act in a more sanctified way than I'm willing to act? Right? God tells me all sorts of things that I shouldn't do, and I sin in thought and word and deed daily. So there are times when I don't even do what I'm not supposed to do, and God has grace for me. And then I do the thing that I'm supposed to do, but I do it and, fine, I guess I'll give money to this charity or whatever, And the Lord doesn't like, oh, that's it. Back to your room. Let's do it again. Okay, fine. So they need to be able to respond to your no and do it in a way that shows that you have respect. If you don't have respect as a parent, they're not likely to respect the institutions that they need to respect as they grow older. Things like bosses at a work, teachers at school, people in a church, and you are the first instantiation of loving authority. I'm doing this for you. You may not understand, but you still have to do it. And so if you, again, and all children mess this up because all humans mess this up. So if they mess it up, fine, I want to have a gracious response. But if systematically they don't respond well to that, then I want to begin to have some sort of corrective measures. And those corrective measures tend to be some sort of consequence, right? So.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We will, by the way, we will be done by 11:45, so just a few more here before we dismiss. We won't be able to get to all of them. One question here, you probably addressed this in premarital, but someone asks, can a Christian marriage succeed if the parties disagree on things like baptism, communion, or other important topics of the faith?
Yeah, I mean, so there's two ways to look at this. One is that Paul addresses this, that if you are, so let's say it was even an unbeliever. So let's say that the issues differ so vastly, it would to make one a believer and one an unbeliever, which I don't hear any of that actually falls into that camp. But that's the more extreme position. And Paul says, stay married, love that spouse well, because through you, holiness is communicated, right? And this is a covenantal view of the family, not an individual view of the family. And so you want to continue to be one who loves well and reflects the nature of Christ as you know him to be in his word. Now, would I prefer that they be on the same page on theologically important issues like sacramentology, baptism? Yes. I think that you're always going to feel more of a rub, more conflict and friction in your marriage, and it's going to be tough. Where do you go and worship if you have a different view on baptism that isn't going to affect one or the other? If you baptize babies, we do, y'all. Yeah, okay, great, make sure. If you are credo Baptist only, right? We're credo and pedo. We do both, and you do both here. But if you're credo only, it's going to rub you when you see children baptized. If you're a pedo Baptist and you go to, if you're a pedo and you go to credo only, you're going to long for the fact that there aren't covenant baptisms. And if you go to a place that does pedo baptism and you only believe in credo, it's going to offend you that you're baptizing children. That's hard. That's going to cause conflict. You can love each other well through that and continue to pray for each other, and mainly that the one would, come to the real, which is both. I'm just sorry. I know. Some of my best friends are Baptists. I love you. You're just wrong. You'll find out. Don't worry, you'll find out. When you get to heaven, you'll find out. You're just wrong. It's fine. We can all be wrong on things. But you can love and be connected and have deep and abiding connection even if you have theological difference. And you want to be one who is always being the shepherd you're called to be regardless of where they are. And I think that's what Paul would call you to, as a witness to Christ's love in your life and for them.
Thank you. Thank you for those for that guidance. Earlier you mentioned, we probably have time for two more, this one plus one more. Earlier you mentioned how the one in the marriage who is the more natural receiver or responder needs to be more assertive in order to be successful, or maybe they more naturally lack assertiveness but would benefit from being more proactive. Could you repeat some of that and expand on that, clarify what that means?
Yeah, so this comes from the work of one of the intimacy researchers, where they were looking at, and is actually incorporated into some of the Prepare and Rich material later, where they're looking at dyads, two people in relationship to each other, and the success rate of those being able to have long-term, stable, intimate connection. And there's more power on the side of the responder who responds well, natural responders. That's how they would categorize it: natural disclosers, natural responders. Which doesn't mean that if you're a natural discloser, you can't be a good, skilled responder, nor if you're a natural responder, you can't be a good and skilled discloser. But your needle probably points in one direction or the other. And so there's a way in which you naturally flow. It's downstream for you. And your downstream position is where the natural disclosure is disclosing, and the natural responder is responding. But it can't just go one direction, because intimacy is bidirectional. And so when it goes the other direction, it's often more clunky and doesn't work as well. And of the two, who holds the most weight is the one who's the natural responder, being willing to be more assertive, not aggressive. That's different. I need this, and you better because you said blah. That's aggressive. Assertive. Hey, I would really like time for us to do X. I would really like time to sit down and to talk about what's going on inside me. I really like time for us to have some physical intimacy. I'd really like time for. Rather than natural responders tend to, more often than the other way, do the magical thinking maneuver, which is, if they really loved me, they would know. Because natural responders are intuitive, typically, and do respond well and pursue well. And so they're like, well, then you would just do that for me. That's what love looks like, right? Well, except you would just both pursue each other to death. Someone needs to be the natural discloser, and someone needs to be the more natural responder. That's one of the ways, the asymmetry that brings us together. And so having the natural responder being willing to say, hey, I would like this, and this wasn't handled well, and it hurt me. And again, I'm not trying to throw that in your face. I'm just trying to say, this hurt me a little bit, and I would like us to do it like this. Can we do it like this? Right? That's where most of the power to get that corrective is.
Thank you. This next one, I think, will be a good place to end. You shared a prayer during the spiritual intimacy segment. Mm-hmm. And this person's wondering if you're able to repeat it. It started something like, "Dear Lord, forgive me of all my failings as a soul shepherd, ... rest of prayer." They'd love to hear it again so they could write it down. Yeah. They got so hung up on their own failings that they just couldn't move on.
That's what a good recording is for.
Yeah.
I'll try. I don't know what I said. One of the things that I do every single day is I preach the gospel to myself. Dr. Derek Thomas, that was one of the things that he really stated early in ministry for me, was like, preach the gospel to yourself, because as one who is a receiver of grace, you are more likely to give grace the more you know you're a receiver of grace. There's a place in my shower where if I haven't preached the gospel to myself and my eyes hit that shower, I say the gospel to myself, but it varies almost every day. And it's not because I'm trying to vary, it's just I can't remember what I said yesterday. So I can't remember exactly what I said, but it's usually something like this. Dear Lord, forgive me of my failings as the shepherd and steward of another person's soul. Please help me to be the shepherd and steward that you are calling me to be, in order to reflect something of the grace and love that is so powerful it cannot help but witness to a watching world something of you. And may it be so powerful that even people who don't know you can't help but see something of you in me as they watch me love my spouse. Something like that.
Did that match what the first prayer was?
It was.
I think it did.
It was different.
It may have been even better.
Variations on a theme.
Yeah. Well, Josh, thank you for that. I think if we all here, if the one thing we did after that conference was pray a prayer like that daily, marriages would be transformed and preserved. So let's all thank Josh.